Mackenzie Shirilla was caught on camera breaking prison rules, and her unsealed disciplinary file just exposed the shocking truth behind her revoked visitation. Ohio prison guards recently released internal logs detailing 36 conduct violations inside her cell block. While her mother pleads for her innocence online, the state's official reports prove Mackenzie was slapped with a 60-day video ban for engaging in highly explicit conduct on a monitored call. How did a high-profile lifer destroy her own privileges while fighting for a new trial? Today, we unseal the timeline that ruined her reputation with guards. If you want the unfiltered truth behind the headlines, hit subscribe to U.S. Crime Cases right now. We dig deep so you don't have to. Right, so to really understand how we got to this point with the prison logs and the revoked privileges, we have to take a step back. We cannot talk about Mackenzie Shurilla's life inside prison without remembering why she is there in the first place. Wow, it is honestly tough to even bring it up without thinking about the families left behind. At the center of all of this are Dominic Russo, who was just 20 years old, and Davion Flanagan, who was only 19. These were two young men with their entire lives ahead of them. Families loved them, friends looked up to them, and in a matter of seconds on a July morning in 2022, everything they were meant to be was just gone. When we look at this case, we have to keep Dominic and Davion in our minds because their tragic loss is the actual heart of this story, not just the drama happening inside a prison cell block. So how did it happen? To present both sides fairly, we have to look at what was said during the trial. The defense team for Mackenzie argued that this was a horrific, unimaginable accident. Her lawyers told the court that she suffered an undiagnosed medical condition. They claimed she completely blacked out behind the wheel of her 2018 Toyota Camry and had absolutely zero memory of the moments leading up to the crash. That was their truth, the side they presented to the judge, trying to explain the unexplainable. But then the prosecution presented a very different story, and this is where things get heavy. Police investigators testified that the data recorder inside Mackenzie's car painted a terrifying picture. The police said the vehicle was traveling at 92 miles per hour through a business park in Strongsville, Ohio. More than that, the investigators stated in court that the accelerator pedal was pushed to the floor at 100% throttle for 5 full seconds before the car slammed into a brick building. The prosecution argued that the road had a curve, and they pointed out that only a conscious, awake driver could have navigated the steering wheel to keep the car on the pavement at those extreme speeds before the impact. At the end of the trial, the judge looked at all the evidence and made her ruling. The court said Mackenzie was guilty of murder, stating she made a conscious choice that day. The judge sentenced her to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life in prison. I see people talking about this online all the time, and it is a lot to process. You take a teenager, give her a life sentence, and drop her into the Ohio Reformatory for women. That transition is going to be incredibly jarring. But what is going on right now, based on her unsealed disciplinary file, shows a situation that is spiraling out of control. According to the unsealed internal conduct reports from the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, the evidence of her behavior inside the facility dropped fast. When we look at the core documents from the prison, the raw numbers tell a very clear, undeniable story. The facility logged 36 total conduct reports against her in just her first few years behind bars. And it is not just guards writing her up for no reason. Out of those 36 reports, the official logs state that she was formally found guilty of 32 of them. Think about that for a second. 32 guilty findings for breaking institutional rules. There is a massive contrast right now between the image of a quiet, misunderstood young woman that some people talk about online and the official reality of an institutional rebellion taking place inside her cell block. If you look at social media, you will see her mother actively pleading for her innocence, painting a picture of a girl who is just trying to survive a harsh environment. But the state's official records outline a completely different narrative. They show a consistent pattern of ignoring direct orders from guards and refusing to adjust to basic institutional authority. You kind of have to wonder why. The core question many people are asking is why an inmate facing a life sentence would risk her few remaining comforts by repeatedly breaking minor and major facility rules. When you are in prison, your privileges are everything. Your ability to buy snacks, use a tablet, or talk to people on the outside is the only thing keeping you connected to the real world. So why throw that away? The direct cause of her recently revoked status answers that exact question. According to the unsealed logs, administrators did not just give her a warning. They issued a strict 60-day restriction on her video visitation privileges. The specific infraction documented by the prison shows that Mackenzie pleaded guilty to exposing herself on a monitored video call. The official reports state she did this with an outside visitor who was completely undressed and using adult toys on the other end of the screen. Because of this, she was charged with a Class 2 institutional rule violation regarding explicit video conduct. Now let's talk about how these video visits actually work, because it helps explain why the prison reacted so strongly. In most facilities, inmates have access to tablets or kiosks where they can video chat with approved family members or friends. It is a lifeline. But the prison guards monitor these calls for a very specific reason. The rules strictly forbid inmates from contacting unapproved individuals on camera, and they absolutely prohibit any form of explicit sexual conduct. This is not just a random rule to make prison life miserable. According to prison security protocols, it is a strict safety measure designed to protect cell block security and maintain order. Think about the environment. You have hundreds of inmates living in close quarters. If the administration allows explicit material to be broadcast onto prison tablets, it creates a massive security risk. It can lead to extortion, fights, and a complete breakdown of the rules that keep both the guards and the inmates safe. So when guards saw what was happening on that video call, they shut it down immediately. The debate currently circulating online looks directly at this behavior, and it is a conversation we need to have. Critics are looking at her file and asking some tough questions. Is this extreme rule-breaking a sign of a complete disregard for prison authority? Does she still think the rules just do not apply to her, even after everything that happened in that courtroom? Or, on the flip side, is this a desperate search for stimulation by a young inmate who simply cannot handle life offline and behind bars? Some people argue that throwing a young woman into a concrete box for the rest of her life is going to cause some serious psychological breaks. They say that the extreme boredom and the isolation push inmates to act out just to feel something, even if that means getting in trouble. They point to her behavior as proof that the prison system does not rehabilitate. It just punishes. But then you have the other side of the argument, and honestly, it is hard to ignore. Others look at the 32 guilty conduct violations and see a continuation of reckless behavior. They remember the 92 miles per hour. They remember the 100% throttle. They argue that breaking the rules on a monitored video call shows a person who still refuses to think about the consequences of her actions. We see this tension all the time in high-profile cases. The public wants to know how an inmate is adapting, and the prison just wants to maintain order. The guards are not there to be her friends or to hold her hand through a tough time. They are there to enforce a rigid set of rules. If the official logs state you broke a Class 2 rule, you lose your privileges. It is a simple, cold equation. And that is the reality she is facing right now. She is locked in a battle between the life she wants to live and the reality the court handed down. Every time she ignores a direct order or misuses a tablet or breaks a facility rule, it goes straight into her permanent file. When you are serving 15 years to life, your conduct file is your only resume for the parole board. If she ever wants to see the outside of that reformatory, she has to prove she can follow the rules. But right now, the unsealed disciplinary file tells a completely different story. It shows someone who is struggling, rebelling, and ultimately losing the very few privileges she had left. Right, so we just talked about the video privileges getting completely shut down. But the reality is the rule breaking goes far beyond those monitored video calls. According to the internal logs, guards conducted physical searches known as shakedowns in her housing unit. If you have never been inside a facility, or if you do not know how a prison shakedown actually works, you have to understand it is an incredibly intense, invasive process. It is not a gentle room inspection. Guards come into the cell block, usually completely unannounced, and they systematically tear every single cell apart. They flip mattresses, empty personal footlockers, check inside the bindings of books, and look for absolutely anything that is not supposed to be there. The exact list of prohibited items found in her possession paints a clear picture of someone consistently trying to bend the rules. The official facility logs state that guards uncovered altered state-issued clothing, unauthorized arts and crafts supplies like glitter and paint, and stolen charms. Now, I see people hear things like glitter and paint and they kind of laugh it off. It sounds innocent. It sounds like high school stuff, right? But in a maximum security state reformatory, uniformity is security. When an inmate alters their state-issued clothing, it is often viewed by guards as a direct defiance of authority. It is an inmate's way of saying they are different, that the rules do not apply to them. And having unauthorized items, even simple ones like stolen charms, means someone is actively circumventing the strict commissary system. They are sneaking things around. Wow. That is a massive red flag for the prison administration, because if an inmate can hide charms and paint, they can hide weapons. But the shakedowns revealed something much more serious than altered clothes. Critically, the official conduct reports also document that she was found in possession of another inmate's unauthorized prescription medication. This is a massive issue. It is one of the most dangerous things an inmate can do. Prescription pills in prison are a heavily guarded, incredibly valuable commodity. The black market for medication behind bars is intense. Having someone else's pills means you are either trading, buying, stealing, or holding contraband that could lead to an overdose or spark a violent dispute inside the block. The prison logs do not explicitly state exactly how she got the medication, but the simple fact that guards found it hidden in her possession proves she is crossing some very dangerous lines and putting herself and others at risk. When we talk about all these infractions, the glitter, the altered clothes, the hoarding of pills, we have to stop and ground ourselves for a second. We really do. Because while Mackenzie is inside trying to bend the rules and collect contraband, there are two families out there who are permanently shattered. We can never forget Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. I mean, Dominic was just 20 years old. Davion was 19. They had their whole lives right in front of them. Their families are not worried about video privileges, prison contraband, or state-issued uniforms. They are visiting graves. They are waking up every single day feeling that heavy, suffocating absence of their sons. To see the person responsible for their deaths making headlines for racking up dozens of conduct reports instead of quietly serving her time, I can only imagine how incredibly painful that must be for them to witness. We treat this entire situation with the absolute gravity it deserves. The mechanics of the prison rules matter, but the loss of those two young men is the true gravity holding this whole story together. On top of the contraband issues, the unsealed logs show a clear and documented history of schedule defiance. Guard reports note multiple instances where she was out of place during mandatory cell counts. If you're not familiar with prison protocol, the count is the single most sacred part of the day. Guards must account for every single living, breathing person inside that facility. If an inmate is simply out of place, the numbers do not match up, and the entire facility can instantly go into lockdown mode. It creates massive tension with the guards, and it punishes every other inmate in the block. There is also a documented refusal to follow direct orders regarding housing unit cleanliness and general prison regulations. She was literally just refusing to clean her area or stand exactly where she was told by the officers in charge. If you haven't subscribed to U.S. Crime Cases yet, hit that button right now so we can keep bringing you the unfiltered truth every week. When you put these cold, hard prison logs next to her mother's public defense of her character, there is a very clear disconnect. It leaves many wondering how her family can continue to advocate for her compliance when her official state conduct file shows dozens of active, guilty infractions. I see her mother posting online, talking to the media, trying to explain how Mackenzie is just trying to adapt, how she is misunderstood and caught in a nightmare. And as a parent, you understand that instinct to protect your child, right? You want to believe the best. You want to shield them, but the guards are not logging 36 conduct violations by accident. They are not writing up formal reports for fun. The state's paperwork proves the reality is much darker, much more defiant, and far more chaotic than the public defense lets on. The family wants to tell one story, but the prison logs are telling another. To really understand what is driving this behavior, we have to look closely at the leaked audio transcripts obtained by media outlets. These are actual recorded phone calls between Mackenzie and her family, and they give us a raw, unfiltered look inside her head. In these recorded phone calls, Mackenzie complains bitterly to her mother about the agonizing boredom of her cell. It is not just casual complaining. It sounds like a deep, sinking desperation. In one call, she specifically states that she didn't even know how to make a book stretch because there was absolutely nothing to do inside the facility. Think about the psychological weight of that statement. Making a book stretch. When you are facing a life sentence, time becomes your absolute worst enemy. You wake up and there's nothing but concrete walls, a rigid routine, and decades of empty time stretching out in front of you. The extreme isolation and the mind-numbing boredom seem to be the exact things pushing her to act out. If she cannot handle the heavy silence of her cell, it appears she creates chaos just to feel some sense of control, or maybe just to have some sort of stimulation. But the prison system does not care about your boredom. They care about order. They care about compliance. The prison's direct response to this boredom and defiance was swift and completely administrative. Institutional rules in Ohio require able-bodied inmates serving life sentences to work. They do not let you just sit in a cell, stare at the wall, and collect conduct violations all day long. To enforce a rigid structure, the prison officially assigned her a mandatory job as a food service worker in the kitchen. For this daily labor, she earns a standard maximum inmate wage of up to $24 per month. Yes, you heard that correctly. $24 for an entire month of waking up before dawn, working in a loud, hot industrial prison kitchen, serving meals to hundreds of other inmates, and scrubbing down heavy equipment. When you really think about it, $24 a month barely buys anything from the prison commissary. It might cover some basic hygiene items, a few instant ramen noodles, and maybe some instant coffee. The facility's approach is crystal clear here. If she is struggling with the downtime that leads to rule violations, they will fill that time with mandatory, exhausting labor. Working in the kitchen is not a privilege. It is a grounding reality check. It forces her to interact with the broader prison population. It puts her under the direct, constant supervision of the food service staff, and it physically drains her. The guards know perfectly well that an exhausted inmate is much less likely to be up late, altering their uniform or trying to hide unauthorized medication during a cellblock count. They are using the structure of the kitchen job to forcefully break the cycle of her rebellion. Whether it will actually work, or if she will just continue to find new ways to push back against the system, is something only time will tell. But right now, the administration is doing everything in their power to force her to realize that she is no longer the one in control. So, as we were just talking about, Mackenzie is now assigned to the prison kitchen, scrubbing pans and working the food service line for $24 a month just to keep her out of trouble. But while she was inside that cell block racking up conduct reports, trying to fight off the boredom, her legal situation outside the walls came to a grinding, permanent halt. If you have been following the appeals process, you know her defense team was working hard to get her a new trial. They presented their side, arguing that the whole trial was flawed and she deserved a second chance in front of a jury. But the Ohio Supreme Court officially rejected her final appeal. And the reason why is honestly staggering. The court stated that her lawyers missed the strict statutory filing deadline by exactly 1 day, right? 1 single day. According to legal records, her defense team simply failed to calculate a leap year in their paperwork. The court said the law requires appeals to be filed within 365 days. But because of the leap year adding an extra day in February, the lawyers filed on what was technically the 366th day. Because of that single administrative error, the Supreme Court refused to review her case entirely. The justice said the rules are the rules, and deadlines are not suggestions. Her legal options for a new trial are now completely gone. Wow. You really have to stop and think about that. Her entire chance at freedom slipped away because someone didn't look closely at a calendar. But as we talk about legal technicalities and leap years, we have to center ourselves back on what really matters here. We cannot get lost in the legal drama and forget the human reality. The families of Dominic, Russo, and Davion Flanagan do not get an appeal. They do not get a second chance to see their sons. While Mackenzie's lawyers were fighting over calendar days and filing deadlines, two families were forced to sit at home, marking the anniversaries of the day their boys were taken from them. I see a lot of people debating the fairness of the appeal being dismissed on a technicality, but we have to remember the overwhelming loss that started all of this. The pain those families feel is permanent. They are living with a life sentence of their own, and watching the person responsible make headlines for breaking prison rules and arguing over paperwork has to be incredibly exhausting for them. This brings us to the permanent damage done by her behavior inside the prison. Now that the appeals are officially over, her reality is set in stone. When you are serving 15 years to life, disciplinary records are not wiped clean at the end of the year. This is not high school where you get a fresh start in the fall. Every single one of those 32 guilty findings is placed directly into her permanent file for the parole board to review. A pattern of 36 conduct violations does massive damage to an inmate's life. It downgrades your security status. It strips away basic comforts like tablet privileges, commissary access, and, as we saw, video calls. If you cannot follow the rules, the prison simply takes away your connection to the outside world until you are left with absolutely nothing but the concrete walls of your cell. But most importantly, this behavioral record ensures that when her first parole eligibility date arrives in October 2037, the state can point directly to her documented rebellion as a concrete reason to deny her release. Think about October 2037 for a second. She will be in her early 30s. She will walk into a room, sit down in front of a parole board, and ask them to let her go home. The board is going to look at the crash where the police said the accelerator was pushed to the floor at 92 miles per hour. Then they are going to open her prison jacket and see 32 guilty conduct violations from her early years behind bars. The court said she was guilty of murder, and the prison logs say she is entirely defiant of authority. It is a massive hurdle to overcome. As we look at all these unsealed records, we really want to hear your analysis based on the facts we have laid out. Let's talk about it. Given that Mackenzie's behavioral file contains 32 guilty findings for rules violations, do you believe prison guards are targeting her because of her high-profile case? I see some people arguing that guards know exactly who she is from the news and are being extra hard on her. Or, on the other hand, is she simply refusing to accept that she is no longer in control of her life? It is a fair question. When you go from being a regular teenager to a lifer in a maximum security reformatory, the loss of control is absolute. Is she just lashing out because she cannot handle being told when to sleep, when to eat, and when to stand up? And what about the reality of her legal situation now? Her Supreme Court appeal was permanently denied due to that one-day legal mistake. Knowing her legal options are now completely gone, will the crushing reality of her sentence finally force her to comply with prison rules, or will her behavioral issues get worse? Sometimes, when an inmate realizes they truly have nothing left to lose and no hope of getting out early, they stop trying to be good. They just give in to the chaos of the cell block. We have to wonder if the end of her appeals will be a wake-up call or the final push into complete rebellion. The unsealed logs reveal frequent documented violations since her incarceration. Do these frequent violations show a genuine inability to adapt to a highly structured environment? We know that prison is a shock to the system. Are these types of behavioral struggles common for a young lifer adjusting to a permanent sentence? You have to imagine it takes years for the brain to truly process that you are never going home. Maybe the glitter, the altered clothes, and the refusal to stand for count are just the messy, chaotic symptoms of a young mind breaking down under the weight of a life sentence. But then, we look at what she said in her own words. In her leaked phone calls, Mackenzie expressed severe depression over extreme boredom, which directly preceded some of her rule violations. She literally said she didn't know how to make a book stretch. It brings up a big debate about how we handle incarceration in this country. Should correctional facilities provide more constructive stimulation for young inmates to prevent behavioral issues? If they gave them more programs, more education, or more ways to occupy their minds, would we see fewer conduct reports? Or are strict administrative punishments like a 60-day video ban entirely justified to maintain order? The prison administration says their job is security, not entertainment. If an inmate breaks a rule, they get punished. It is that simple, right? And all of this leads back to date in the future. With her final legal appeal officially rejected by the state Supreme Court, her path to freedom relies entirely on her future parole hearing. How heavily should a parole board weigh early prison conduct violations from her 20s when evaluating her readiness for release more than a decade from now? If she cleans up her act for the next 10 years, should the board forgive the 32 violations she caught when she was just trying to adjust to prison life? Or does a record like this show a fundamental flaw in her character that proves she is not safe to release back into society? Finally, the release of her extensive disciplinary file has sparked intense public debate online and in the media. Does making an inmate's internal behavioral records public serve the interest of transparency? Some people say the public has a right to know how a convicted murderer is behaving behind bars, especially when the victims' families are still suffering. But others ask, does it invite unnecessary outside scrutiny that complicates an individual's rehabilitation process behind bars? If every mistake she makes is broadcast on the news, does it make it impossible for her to just quietly serve her time and do the work to get better? The cameras from the courtroom are long gone. The legal appeals are completely finished, and now her personal privileges are officially revoked. How does an inmate like this survive a decade behind bars when they cannot even follow basic rules? The reality of her situation is setting in, and it is heavy. Thank you for staying till the end. Share your analysis of the prison logs below, and subscribe as we keep tracking unyielding true crime cases.